Okay, the NHL is still to confirm a start date for the 2020-2021 season. What we do know is if and when play does resume, it will be after January the 1st. There'll be no play before Christmas. When Gary Bettman came out last week and said January 1st is the target start date, it was very interesting because the AHL, the league below, the affiliate league, said February the 6th. So there's a good month, 5 weeks difference in expected start dates. That's when the AHL wants to start playing. Now, there are players who play in the NHL who are on two-way contracts with the AHL. So if they're on two-way contracts, let's say you've got a prospect who is waiver exempt, or you've got a player on a two-way contract that's worth, let's say, $800,000 or $1 million at the NHL level, $80,000, $90,000, like a goaltender, for example. You want him match ready. If he's not playing in the AHL till February the 6th, an earlier start date of the NHL is a head-scratcher. However, the NHL is keenly aware of a TV deal negotiation in the US next summer, is keenly aware it wants to get the Stanley Cup awarded before, I think, July the 24th to avoid clashing with the Olympics as a priority in order to aid their audience retention and aid those negotiations for as much money as possible from whatever broadcaster in the US is willing to pay the money on a national deal, because NBC's deal does expire, although there are still regional deals with Fox and Comcast, and I believe MSG Network carries obviously the Rangers, Islanders, Buffalo and Devils games. So there are some regional broadcasters who also carry the games, but there's no major overriding national broadcaster apart from NBC in the playoffs. NBC does not have universal rights to every team and every game. That is interesting. That is important. There is not a unified TV deal for the regular season in the US. So that's something that's on their mind. What is also interesting, though, is the NHL and the NHLPA are at loggerheads over expanding the escrow payments that players have to make, and also further wage cuts and wage deferrals. I think around 27% of a player's salary is now not theirs. They've agreed to defer salary and put more money into the escrow system, which has been a sticking point leading up to the last collective bargaining agreement and this current extension. Now, the owners want to claw some more money back. The players don't want to give it away anymore. I can see a bit of give from both the players and the league because they're keenly aware Seattle's joining as an expansion team, hence these TV negotiations, and players are returning from overseas to report to training facilities. So the NHLPA is clearly advising its members to prepare themselves to start playing either exhibition games in the first week of January or regular season games in the first week of January at the earliest, if they are returning now to the US and Canada. Also, the later they leave it, the more logistical nightmare it becomes in organising bubble cities and the divisional realignment and getting teams prepared. We know San Jose, for example, can't train in their training facility because the outbreak in California, and that part of California, is quite severe at the moment, but some of the teams in Canada are having open skates. So some teams are already able to access their training facilities, others aren't. Now, if you want to put the bubble situation in and have divisional bubbles, and have an all-Canadian division because the border being shut, that needs to be organised as quickly as possible and the provisions put in place. The longer you leave it, the more difficult and expensive it actually becomes to do it on short notice. Now, the NHL has a 6-week window in order to start the season. The first, I think, January to the 14th, 15th of February. That's the window they've got in order to award the Stanley Cup by the latest date that they want to, which is the 24th of July. However, the later the start date, the shorter the season. I would think a 48 to 62 game season, somewhere in that range, is most likely. 68 games, 70 games, not looking likely at this point, as we would already be 2 months into the season by this point. They've lost 2 months' worth of hockey already. If January 1st is the target date, you would have to quarantine players for 2 weeks. Then you would have to get at least a couple of exhibition games and get players up to speed, match fit, that kind of thing, in order for January 1st to happen, which would also mean discussions over the Christmas break period, which the players argued for in extending the CBA, which means the league would go against that. January, I would think, 14th to 15th is most likely. That would mean players would return into camp and December 31st, January 1st. I think the start date is actually when you can actually return to camp, get your team together and begin training for exhibition and regular season games. I think January the 1st is the most likely, with players returning from overseas and other players reporting to team facilities. Yes, we are going to have a season. It's the length. I cannot see a lockout happening being good optics with Seattle joining and the the TV deal negotiations that NHL executives are going to be having with US broadcasters. They want to have as much hockey on as possible, and they want to get as many eyes on the TV as possible and sell their product to as many people as possible, have good viewer ratings, good numbers, in order to sell that to a potential new broadcast partner or the existing broadcast partners. So it's going to be very, very interesting. The discussions over the escrow payments, they carry on, but it's looking more and more likely that the season's probably going to start later in January. But when? Because the later the start date, the shorter the season, which could benefit some teams and hinder others, could benefit some players and hinder others. If you're a Devils fan, for example, or an Ottawa Senators fan, you haven't played since March. Other teams have only played 5 games or so, or three to 5 games since March in the play-in round. So those teams that were knocked out in the play-in round and those teams that missed the play-in round, these players haven't played for a very, very long time. For the most part, there have been some trades, there has been some free agency, but these players haven't played. And if you've got like a prospect who was signed at the draft, after the draft, they may not have played since March either. So there's a lot of players who haven't played a lot of hockey, which means the risk of injury goes up. And it's going to be interesting. So an earlier start date would possibly benefit those teams getting those players back on the ice and playing. And it appears that there's discussions over giving them an extra bit of preparation time to get those players up to speed. At the same time, the later they leave it, so if they go into February, a 48-game season is most likely. If they start in January, they can still get 62 to 68 games. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. We wait and see when the start date is announced. But the signs are starting to look more positive. But we'll have to wait and see. There is still a chance of a lockout. There could still be a breakdown in talks over the current CBA collective bargaining agreement and the escrow payments and the wage deferral. So that could still break down and there could still be loggerheads there, which would be bad optics for the league, to its fan base, and to the casual sports fan who may not necessarily dislike hockey but may not understand, or even the new fan that they want to attract with Seattle and the ones they've just attracted with Vegas. It's not a good look. So we'll see what happens. Thank you very much for watching. Place your thoughts below and I'll have some more videos for you very, very soon.